What does the Book of the Dead really say? The name sounds like some forbidden book of dark magic. As if the moment you open it, a curse will spread, a terrible secret will be unleashed, and the human mind will be dragged into madness. But the truth is both calmer than that, and much deeper. Because the Book of the Dead is not really about death itself. It is about what happens after death. And more importantly, in the eyes of the ancient Egyptians, death was not the end. Death was only the doorway to another world. But behind that doorway, there was not immediate peace. First there was trial. There was a journey. There was fear. There was judgment. And that is exactly why the Book of the Dead existed. So the dead would not be lost in the dark. So they would not open the wrong gate. So they would not be condemned by their own heart. So they would not stand speechless before the gods. In short, so they would know what to say in order to reach eternity. The ancient Egyptians believed that when a person died, everything did not simply end. The real question was how dangerous the next stage would be. Because once the body was placed in the tomb, the unseen part of the person, the soul-like being, began a long and dangerous journey. This realm is often described as the underworld, the afterlife, or the Duat, and the Duat was not a simple hell. It was a mysterious region where fear and order existed side by side, where there were gods, creatures, gates, lakes of fire, knife-bearing guardians, and endless trials. In that place, courage alone was not enough. You needed knowledge. You needed to know the right names. You needed to speak the right words at the right moment. Because in ancient Egypt, a name was never just a name. A name was a form of existence. To know the true name of something was to gain power over it. And that is why the dead person had to know the name of the gate, the name of the being guarding it, and even the sacred words that would allow passage. That is why the Book of the Dead was not simply a text to be read. It was a map for a journey that had to be survived. The ancient Egyptians did not call this text the Book of the Dead. That is a modern name given much later. In their own world, this was more about coming forth by day. At first, that sounds strange. Why would a book about death be connected to coming out into the daylight? Because in ancient Egyptian thought, death was not about being trapped forever in darkness. The goal was to emerge from the darkness, to return to the light, to enter a renewed form of existence. If the sun could rise again every morning, then a human being could also rise again, if the right path was found. So this text was not meant to keep the dead inside death. It was meant to guide them through death and allow them to continue existing. Even the title itself speaks not of horror, but of continuation. Not closure, but passage. Not annihilation, but reappearance. But this rebirth was not automatic. It was not guaranteed for everyone, because the afterlife was imagined as an order that only the worthy could truly enter. That is why the ancient Egyptians prepared so seriously for death. What may seem strange to us today? The mummification, the grave goods, the amulets, the Ashabdi figures, the inscriptions on tomb walls, the prayers written on coffins. All of these were parts of one great idea. After death, a person was still a person. There was still a self that had to be protected. There were still dangers. Identity could still be lost. The name could still be erased. The being itself could still fall apart. And that kind of loss was considered even more terrifying than physical death. Because once you were truly erased, there was no return. That is why the preservation of the body mattered. The preservation of the name mattered. And the preservation of the heart mattered. In ancient Egyptian belief, a person was not only flesh and bone. A human being had visible and invisible parts. The body, the name, the essence, the moving soul, the shadow, the heart. Together, these made a human being whole. After death, these parts were not supposed to scatter, break apart, or be forgotten. And the Book of the Dead offered words that protected this wholeness. Sometimes it drove away a serpent. Sometimes it guarded against a crocodile. Sometimes it allowed the dead to breathe again. Sometimes it restored the power of speech. And sometimes it prepared the soul for the most terrifying possibility of all: the second death. The second death may be one of the most chilling ideas in all of ancient Egypt, because the first death was the death of the body, but the second death was the total destruction of existence itself. After that, there would be no memory, no rebirth, no place among the gods. In other words, the second death was the loss of eternal life. That is why the words in the Book of the Dead were not only a guide, they were also a defense. A human being was speaking against personal extinction, speaking to the heart, trying to return to the body, trying to preserve the name, the voice, and the right to continue. And all of this shows us something important. The Book of the Dead was not a romantic text about death. It was an intensely practical one. It was less like a statement of belief, and more like an instruction manual. But even that comparison is not enough, because this was not an ordinary journey. This was about continuing to exist at all. Now imagine this. You are living thousands of years ago. You are born in a world shaped by the Nile. You see the rising sun as part of divine order. You connect the seasons, the floods, the harvest, the drought, the balance of life, and the threat of chaos with the gods. And one day, you know you will die. But death is not emptiness to you. It is the place where trials begin. In a world like that, imagine someone placing a text in your hands and saying, "This will tell you which gates to pass through after death, what to say to the creatures you meet, how to speak in the presence of the gods, how to defend yourself when your heart is weighed, and how to protect yourself from the dangers ahead." A text like that would be priceless. And it was. The Book of the Dead was often prepared for specific individuals. Not every copy was the same. Not everyone had access to every spell. A person's wealth, status, and resources affected what could be included. So even though we speak today of one single Book of the Dead, in reality there was no fixed, unchanging, universal book. There was a tradition made up of different collections, arranged in different ways, for different people, in different lengths. Some were shorter, some were longer, some contained more images, some contained more text. Some were written on coffins, some on papyrus, some even extended to the linen wrappings themselves. But the purpose remained the same: to guide the dead person safely through the afterlife. These texts were often filled with beautiful images, because in ancient Egypt, images held power just as words did. To depict something was, in a sense, to make it real. That is why the scenes we see in the Book of the Dead are not merely decoration. They are functional. For example, the weighing of the heart scene. Today, it is one of the most famous images from ancient Egypt. A scale, with the heart on one side, and the feather of Maat on the other. Nearby stands Anubis. Beside him is Thoth. In the distance sits Osiris. And waiting close by is the terrifying creature, Ammit. This scene is so famous that many people imagine it is the entire meaning of the Book of the Dead. But in truth, It is only one of the most critical moments in a much larger journey. Because the real question is this: will you pass this judgment? Will your heart prove to be as light as the feather of truth? Maat was one of the central principles of ancient Egyptian thought. Truth, balance, justice, order. The force that kept the cosmos from collapsing into chaos. Even the pharaoh built legitimacy around Maat, the order of society, the order of the gods, the order of the universe. All were tied to it. And after death, a person was measured by that same principle. So what saved you was not only magic words. Your life also mattered. In one of the most famous parts of the Book of the Dead, the deceased stands before the gods and tries to justify their life. I have not done this. I have not done that. Turning life itself into a moral declaration. I did not oppress anyone unjustly. I did not steal. I did not disrupt order with lies. I did not disrespect what was sacred. I did not take what belonged to another. I did not ignore the hungry. I did not cheat the scales. These lines are among the most fascinating in the text. Because here, magic and morality cannot be separated. The words are powerful, yes, but the life behind those words matters too. For the ancient Egyptian, salvation was not simply memorizing a secret code. It also required living in harmony with cosmic order. And yet, the Book of the Dead is not made only of grand and abstract ideas. It also contains very concrete fears. There are spells against serpents, spells against crocodiles, spells to avoid being torn apart, spells to keep the head attached, spells to prevent the heart from being taken away, spells to restore breath, spells to reopen the mouth, spells to secure water, spells to survive fire, spells to pass through guarded gates. Every danger had its own words. And that tells us something very important. The ancient Egyptians did not imagine the afterlife as a vague fog. They imagined it as a place that felt real, physical, structured, and dangerous. There were roads. There were obstacles. There were attacks. There was hunger, thirst, darkness, and fear. But there was also light, water, abundance, rest, and the possibility of reunion. The Book of the Dead was the bridge between those two possibilities. Imagine it for a moment. You close your eyes and death comes. But everything does not simply vanish. First there are sounds. People weeping. Priests chanting. Rituals being spoken before the tomb. Your body being prepared. Amulets being placed. Sacred writings laid beside you. And then your unseen self begins its journey. A gate appears before you. A guardian stands there. Its face is not human. It carries a blade. It is fierce. It asks your name. But not only your name. It expects you to know its name as well. Then another passage appears. Another guardian. Then a region surrounded by fire. Then dark waters. Then poisonous beings. Then questioning spirits. And your only weapon is correctly spoken words. That is what the Book of the Dead truly describes. It tells us that after death, silence is not enough. Speech is necessary. It tells us that survival depends not on forgetting, but on remembering. Because in that realm, mistakes can be costly. One wrong name, one missing phrase, one failed defense, and perhaps the gate to eternity closes forever. Some of the spells in the Book of the Dead deal with transformation. And at first, that sounds very strange. Why would the dead want to become a bird? Why become a lotus flower? Why rise like a falcon? Because transformation here is not escape. It is adaptation. It is the gaining of new abilities. To become a bird is to gain freedom of movement. To become a lotus is to connect with rebirth. To become a falcon is to rise into the divine sky. In other words, the text does not aim to keep a person unchanged after death. It aims to preserve the self while allowing it to adapt to a new reality. That is a crucial detail. For the ancient Egyptians, immortality did not mean becoming a frozen stone forever. It meant remaining alive, being able to transform, to move, to follow the sun, to appear again. That is why the Book of the Dead does not promise a passive eternity. It promises an active existence. You can still speak. You can still walk. You can still appear before the gods. You can still eat. You can still see fields. You can still hope to reunite with those you love. And what lies at the end of this journey? What is the greatest reward? In the Egyptian imagination, the final goal is often the field of reeds. An ideal realm, not a strange cosmic void, but something like a perfected Egypt. Fertile, ordered, peaceful, bright. There are rivers there. There are fields there. There is abundance. There is closeness to the gods. There is the hope of reunion with family. In short, it is a vision of eternal life in which the best parts of earthly life continue without corruption. That tells us something deeply human. The ancient Egyptian did not want to vanish into a completely alien paradise. They wanted meaningful order to continue. Salvation was not escape from the world, but entry into its perfected form. And here, another powerful detail appears. As fantastical as the scenes of the Book of the Dead may seem, at its center are deeply human fears. The fear of being forgotten, the fear of being erased, the fear of unjust punishment, the fear of being separated forever from loved ones, the fear of losing the way, the fear of being alone in darkness, the need to find the right words at the right moment, and finally, the need to prove that a life was not wasted. Perhaps that is why the Book of the Dead still affects us so deeply today. Because if we treat it only as an exotic artifact, we miss something essential. This text is one of humanity's oldest and most serious responses to death. It is a text of resistance, using words against fear. A text of defending order against chaos. A text of memory resisting erasure. And perhaps most importantly, it is the text of a person giving a final statement before their own heart. Let us return once more to the weighing of the heart. The symbolism in that scene is powerful. The heart is not just an organ. It is your inner truth. Everything you did in life, everything you thought, everything you intended, is there. That is why the heart stands apart from you as a witness that cannot lie. You may speak. You may swear innocence. You may defend yourself. But the heart does not lie. And if the heart is heavy, if your life is not in harmony with Maat, then Ammit waits. That terrifying creature, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, is there for one purpose, not to torture you endlessly, but to end you, to remove you from order, to consume the heart of the failed soul. The true horror of that scene lies exactly there, because what is at risk is not simply punishment, but the loss of the right to eternity itself. That is why the tone of the Book of the Dead is so fascinating. On one hand, it offers hope. On the other, it constantly warns. It protects, but it also lists threat after threat. Like life itself, It carries reassurance and uncertainty at the same time. And the fact that many of these texts were used during funeral rituals, and that some sections are written directly in the voice of the deceased, makes them even more powerful. Because the text brings the living and the dead together in a single ritual. The priest recites. The family listens. The words are spoken on behalf of the dead. And then it is believed that these same words continue to work in the next world, as if the sentences do not end when they enter the tomb, but continue their work in another plane of existence. That idea alone is extraordinary. A text whose power is not expected to end at the moment of writing, but to continue after death itself. When you think of it that way, calling the Book of the Dead simply writing is not enough. It is also a union of voice, image, ritual, and belief. Yes, the word technology may sound modern here, but the meaning is clear. The ancient Egyptians built a complex system to confront death. Mummification was for the body. Amulets were for protection. Rituals were for transition. And the Book of the Dead was for orientation. Together, these things made death more manageable. Not fully controllable, but something one could prepare for. And perhaps that is why, when we look at the Book of the Dead, what we really see is not only Egypt's fear of death, but Egypt's discipline in the face of death. So why do we often misunderstand this text today? Because modern culture hears the words of the dead and immediately imagines horror, curses, tombs, darkness, mummies, revenge, forbidden magic. But from the ancient Egyptian point of view, this text was frightening and comforting at the same time, because it gave names to the unknown. It drew a map through darkness. A human being fears less when something can be named. And that is exactly what the Book of the Dead did. It broke the uncertainty of the afterlife into parts, named them, described them, and made them manageable. If a serpent was waiting, there were words for that. If a gate appeared, there were words for that. If judgment came, there were words for that. If thirst struck, there were words for that. Chaos could not be eliminated completely, but one could be prepared for it. And perhaps that is one of humanity's oldest forms of comfort. Preparation does not erase fear, but it gives fear a shape. That is one of the greatest things the Book of the Dead still tells us today. Faced with death, human beings do not only weep. They also think. They write. They create order. They build ritual. They draw maps. They create symbols. They build culture against the fact of their own mortality. That is why the Book of the Dead matters not only for understanding ancient Egypt, but also for understanding humanity itself. Because this text tells us something profound. A human being cannot endure the idea of total disappearance without meaning. We want to give meaning to it. We want to give it structure. We want to give it a path. Ancient Egypt did exactly that. And it did so with such a powerful visual and verbal language, that thousands of years later, we still look at those scenes and feel something stir inside us. A human figure standing before the scale, the silent gaze of the gods, Thoth preparing to record the result, Anubis adjusting the balance, Osiris seated in the distance, and Ammit waiting beside the heart. This is not just a religious image. It is the mythological theater of human conscience. Perhaps that is exactly why it has remained so powerful. So let us return to the question one last time. What does the Book of the Dead really tell us? Is it about curses? No. Is it only about death? No. Is it about gods? Partly, but at its deepest level, the Book of the Dead tells this story. When a human being dies, everything does not end at once. There is still a road ahead. That road is dangerous. It requires knowledge. It requires courage. It requires truth. It requires facing your own heart. And if that road is completed successfully, then the person emerges from the darkness. The name is not lost. The voice is not lost. The self is not lost. The soul reaches the light. It is welcomed back into order. It comes forth into the day. Perhaps that is why the true meaning of this text is not really about horror, but about hope. Not easy hope, but hope that has passed through trial. Hope earned by walking through darkness. And maybe that is what still makes the Book of the Dead so powerful even now. Because while it claims to describe the world after death, it also quietly whispers something about how life itself should be lived. Live truthfully. Live in balance. Do not stain your name. Do not make your heart heavy. Because in the end, everyone stands alone before their own heart. And in that moment, no title, no wealth, no power, no performance speaks for you. Only the heart speaks. Only truth speaks. Only balance speaks. And the ancient answer written thousands of years ago still stands before us. Death may be dark, but for the one who knows the way, eternity is possible.